OT essentially represents this unique way to cause shock factor. So for example, if you manage to impact water or power, you're going to impact a lot of citizens that rely on that water and power for critical infrastructure. This particular one in County Mayo actually left, I think it was around 160 households without water for 2 days. So we are seeing these attacks come closer to home.
Welcome to Orange Cyberdefense. I'm Ajay Bhardwaj. Today we're focusing on a topic that's becoming increasingly important to CISOs responsible for operational technology. How advanced threat actors are moving quietly using legitimate system functionality to cause real-world physical impact. My guest today is Ric Derbyshire, a principal security researcher at Orange Cyberdefense. Ric is also part of the UK NCSC's Industry 100, a group of the most forward-thinking security experts in the country. So Ric, before we get into the detail of OT, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm a principal security researcher here at Orange Cyberdefense. So that means I work on the research team, which is a global function that we have. The way I like to talk about it is we look at cool things and tell cool stories. And my particular focus is mainly on operational technology, but I like to assert a bit of a flavor of critical national infrastructure on it, just because I kind of like that edge to it as well.
Fantastic. So before we get into the concept itself, let's set context, right? And operational technology and security around operational technology has been talked about for years. I know I've been involved in it in various forms for absolute years. But what's different now? What's changed? What are we up to?
It's changed a lot since around 2010, where awareness for the security really kicked off for security of operational technology. Everything has changed since, basically with products and services being particularly tailor-made to the actual technology itself and to fit within the natural constraints of the environment.
Mm-hmm. Let's get specific. Mm-hmm. The geopolitical context has changed massively in the last few years. State-sponsored attacks are on the rise. Can you talk a little bit about that with respect to OT and the impact?
Absolutely. So we are seeing various geopolitical crises erupt all around the world, and while the UK isn't directly involved in them, at least at the time of that we're talking right now, what we're seeing is essentially this strange shift towards operational technology. Not only are we seeing the state actors targeting it like we have done for the past couple of decades, we're also starting to see this rise of what we're calling escalatory hacktivism. So we've moved away from the kind of like Guy Fawkes mask wearing anonymous that target corporations, and we're starting to see hacktivists that are beginning to align with kind of the state ideologies and that kind of thing. And essentially what they are doing is beginning to try and push those messages of their host state and to kind of chase the cyber dragon of attention and infamy, so to speak. They've moved away as well from the kind of technical attacks where they would do distributed denial of service or kind of defacements of websites. And they're starting to want to cause cyber physical impact and show intent for that at least. And so to do that, they've started to build this capability for operational technology, which is obviously concerning in itself. But also what we're seeing is the shift that just targeting operational technology, while it does cause cyber physical impact, it doesn't get as much attention as if they target critical infrastructure, because the idea for them is to impact as many people as possible. Mm-hmm. So for example, if you manage to impact water or power, you're going to impact a lot of citizens that rely on that water and power for critical infrastructure. So the idea is that if they impact those, then they cause more of a big deal. And so essentially what we're seeing is this strange shift, and it's extremely complex to attribute as well, because where these hacktivists are essentially pushing the ideologies of their host state, and they're beginning to develop in sophistication and tactics, techniques, and procedures that mimic the host state, we start to really find this challenging idea of who is actually targeting us. Is it the state themselves? because everything looks like it? Or is it an independent actor? Or is it anywhere in between where perhaps the hacktivist group may be an independent actor, but they are either tolerated all the way up to integrated into the state apparatus? So it makes it really challenging to respond to, because that causes different diplomatic responses, different law enforcement responses, and all kinds of things like that.
OT attacks are certainly on the rise. That's clear. How bad is the problem? How big is the problem?
So we've been collecting a data set of cyber attacks that impact operational technology. So cyber attacks have had some sort of cyber physical impact, and we've been collecting that for roughly 3 to 4 years now. And the actual data set itself spans roughly 37 years. So, so from 1988, which is the first one that we could find good evidence for, all the way to December 25, which is the last time, at the time of we're filming, that we did a major data collection. And we're seeing it dramatically rise, specifically from 2020 onwards. And what we actually saw then was impacts of criminals targeting IT using specific IT tactics, techniques, and procedures, and only landing in levels 4 and 5 of the Purdue model, which is the IT environment, which looked really weird. What we kind of ended up realizing was this is entirely ransomware focused. So what we see is with IT-OT convergence, that a lot of operational technology has dependencies that reside in the IT. So with IT having its greater attack surface, essentially what we're seeing is these dependencies get taken down, and then simply the OT cannot continue to function. Either that, or the other kind of idea that we speculate on is that the cybersecurity and IT professionals that work at the organization simply don't trust the controls or the network segregation that they have in place. So they voluntarily shut down the OT in order to essentially prevent any spread or propagation of the attack that they're currently experiencing in the IT. What we actually see in terms of the attacks that include the use of OT-specific tactics, techniques, and procedures is that it only makes up 14% of our entire data set, which is really quite small. That's over 37 years as well. Wow. So that really is quite a small number. And if we break that down a little bit further, we look at how that can be split up into those attacks that we would consider crude. So simple things like they just turn off programmable logic controllers, or they do basic ClickOps where they get onto a human machine interface or SCADA and they just use the existing functionality in a crude way. And the other type is sophisticated attacks, where they actually take the time to truly understand the environment and they have some meaningful and specific impact in mind, where they actually want to cause some sort of very specific cyber physical impact. And those are split evenly over the 37 years of 7% and 7%, which make up the full 14.
Wow. Okay, so 14%, it doesn't feel like a big enough problem to really care about. Why do we care so much? What's the issue here?
So it really gets down to what the impacts of those attacks are. So when we look at the massive surge of ransomware attacks, where essentially the OT environment just gets shut down or it can't continue to operate, we just see kind of like a disruption of operations. It kind of shuts down or slows or something like that, which is bad, especially for manufacturing environments that may have like small margins, for example. But what we see in actual OT specific impacts is things like manipulation of control. So the adversaries manage to get in and actually change what's happening in the environment, or denial of control, where the victim can't actually respond to it, or manipulation of view. So the victim doesn't actually know what's going on. And another one is that I always point out is damage to property, which is it just shows the type of destruction that's possible. And those impacts that I mentioned are unique to what we call category 2 attacks that include the use of OT specific tactics, techniques, and procedures.
So we know that the impact is high with OT, but what makes them uniquely attractive to hackers, to the attacker?
So it ties into that geopolitical shift and the escalatory hacktivism piece. And essentially what we're seeing is an addition in the threat landscape to the traditional thing that we're seeing most at the moment, which is like cybercrime and cyber extortion, which is all driven by return on investment. It's essentially the adversaries in that case want to make money out of it, which has traditionally been quite difficult to do in an OT environment. Right. But now we're seeing this shift both in terms of like the overall geopolitical thing, but also in terms of escalatory hacktivism, where OT essentially represents this unique way to cause shock factor. So especially for hacktivists and also some state actors, just being able to essentially cause this cyber physical impact and essentially affect widespread amount of people. Like if you've got your water cut off, you're going to be really annoyed with the government because they haven't protected you from this kind of thing from adversarial actors. But also as well, it presents strategic things. So if you're working for a defense contractor, you might have, say, for example, certain things that you're manufacturing that an adversary might want to either just do espionage and find out about, but also impact. So if you change certain alloy composition in certain like defense assets, then that might actually have like knock-on effects down the line that if you haven't seen as a victim, haven't seen actually happening, you don't know about it, and then this goes on to become an issue later down the line. That's a massive problem. But then you have to really consider your threat model in this situation as well, because you might have operational technology as part of your biscuit factory in the north of England, and where I might find that to be critical national infrastructure. Unfortunately, I don't necessarily, well, fortunately, I guess, you don't necessarily like kind of fit that bill of particular victim for these state or hacktivist actors that are doing things for very geopolitically strategic reasons.
Perfect. That's great. And to be fair, my morning digestive is pretty important to me too. So Ric, you've coined this phrase, living off the plant. I think a lot of us, especially in IT environments, are used to the phrase living off the land. What does that mean what does living off the plant mean in an OT environment?
So it's a phrase I'm trying to coin and trying to get some attention for. And it is distinct from living off the land, but the whole point of living off there is the kind of like key overlap in the Venn diagram, so to speak. So living off the land is quite familiar. It's using the existing functionality in an IT environment typically. And the idea there, for the main part, is to essentially be stealthy and to avoid detection and to kind of lay low and be able to do what you need while essentially using the existing functionality. And while there is absolutely an element of that in living off the plant in an OT environment, and even stealth is an important factor that comes with it. The whole point here is that to cause meaningful and specific cyber physical impact, it's often a prerequisite to actually use the native OT functionality, which is distinct from the IT environment where it's just a means to an end of remaining stealthy. This is actually like the means to an end of actually being able to do what you want to do. So that's where we kind of try and draw that distinction and also mention that kind of like that plant, that idea of that it is OT, and it kind of rhymes and it kind of almost, and it just kind of sounds cool. So yeah, we're just trying to essentially make that distinction and really kind of raise awareness that living off the land techniques in OT are different and they actually have a reason other than just kind of like stealth.
Okay, so this one's really interesting. So I'm super interested by this, and I love the phrase. What was it again?
Living off the plant.
Living off the plant. Okay, we won't forget that. But the thing that's interesting for me here is this seems difficult, right? So this isn't about some code or malware that you're applying into the plants. This is about understanding plant dynamics and understanding that whole environment. That ain't simple. Can you help us understand a little bit what's behind this and what's in the mind of the attacker when they're doing this work?
So there's a whole host of things that like come into play here. So of course the typical kind of like hacking skill set is really important. The kind of like cyber adversary skill set, so to speak. And it really does matter because you have to get to the point of getting into the OT in the first place, which is going to involve all of the skills that come with doing cyber attacks in the first place. But once you get into the OT, there's a complete game shift. So, for example, you need to know about what operational technology is in general. So you need to know about what types of devices you're going to encounter and what they do. And then there's different vendor ecosystems that do various of the similar functionality that you have to know about and be prepared for whichever vendor ecosystem you find yourself encountering. But then further down the line, you also have to consider how different processes are engineered. Engineering certain things to, distribute water or power or generate power are very different to things like making biscuits in the north of England. So, for example, you really have to know how that process is like at an abstract level going to actually be done. But then that's only at the abstract level, because, for example, if you want to disrupt a water treatment facility in one place, even if it's made by the same organization, put together by the same organization, two different water treatment facilities that are geographically separate, maybe engineered differently, maybe they were built at different times, maybe for some reason they have different processes. So you have to be able to react to the specific implementation as well. So there's a whole range of things that you need to do that start at the general knowledge that is abstract that you can know before getting there, but there's also knowledge that you have to build when you get in there as well.
Can we just explore that a little bit more? Because this sounds like long term. This isn't something you do overnight. This isn't something you just go in, we're going to hack this overnight. This takes a lot of preparation, and it feels like it would be for a long-term outcome or for a big outcome. Can we explore that a little? Can you just explore that with us a little bit? Because I think what you're talking about is actually acquiring skills specific to a plant that may be very different from other plants doing very similar things.
So I think the skills and the general knowledge are broadly applicable to someone that has kind of like some sort of OT specialization. Okay. But it does absolutely take a long time to develop that specific knowledge to the victim environment that you find yourself in. And one of the ways we use to describe that is by talking about a tactic that's unique to operational technology attacks called process comprehension.
Okay.
So this involves the adversary obviously gaining access, but then once they get there, they need to use that access to understand what's going on, obviously, which is what we're talking about. So they need to know how the physical process is laid out, how it's engineered. They need to know how the operational technology sits on top of that, how it controls, it monitors, and it automates that process. They need to know how the network architecture is, how the actual IP networking basically is laid out, and where there may be network segregation, there may be individual cells. And then they need to know about things like how do the cybersecurity controls that they're going to have to circumvent, how are they laid out? And then importantly as well, it's about the people in the process. What are the people doing that are monitoring the cybersecurity controls or monitoring the operational technology or interacting with the physical environment? What are they doing? What does their daily life look like? And how do we do things that they don't notice or they can't do anything about? And then there's obviously going into that and things that what they can't do about what are the physical security controls and the safety processes like as well. Because sometimes a really resilient environment might actually have safety controls that mean no matter what we do in the cyber domain, there's just nothing we can do because there are analog controls. So it's working out how all of these things are laid out by gathering various documentation from around the environment, by probing certain devices in very specific ways, by logging into things like engineering workstations that are used to program and configure the devices around the environment and probing around those. And just building up this process comprehension and essentially getting an idea of how you actually can execute the attack going forward.
Wow. Okay. So incredibly complex and a broad and deep amount of knowledge needed for this. Is it safe to say, or it's safe to assume, that this isn't the single hacker in their bedroom? This is teams of people going after this. Is that fair, or my?
I'm not a threat intelligence expert, so I couldn't possibly tell you in any detail, but I'd assume generally this is a multi-person discipline. Yeah. Typically because having that kind of cybersecurity know-how and also the engineering know-how, not only to work out how things work, but also to know how to manipulate that environment in the precise way that actually causes the impact that you want. Typically that's going to involve like a specialized engineering skill set as well. And while there may be unicorns out there that have those, and there certainly are, and I know like a few really talented people that certainly are like that. I think for the most part, that's going to be separate people, separate skill sets.
Feels like it. So let's bring this close to home. It's the theory of it sounds fantastical, but it's clearly going on. Any examples of where this might have happened closer to home?
Yeah, so in County Mayo in Ireland, I believe in 2023, there was a water treatment facility that was attacked. So essentially, what happened was a IRGC-linked group, Cyber Avengers, essentially wanted to target Israeli-built technology, and these were Israeli-built PLCs by a company called Unitronics. And what they were programmable logic controllers / human machine interfaces. So they had they had the control and automation, but also they had ways to interact with the physical environment by like a panel. And essentially, what they did was they defaced the screens on the devices. They did that, I think, by essentially using default credentials or something like that. And then they uploaded a different config, or in OT we call it downloading a config. So they downloaded this different config, but that actually caused like really bad problems with the water treatment facility. And this by no means wasn't the only one. There were multiple water treatment facilities and other types of facilities that are impacted all over the world. But this particular one in County Mayo actually left, I think it was around 160 households without water for 2 days. So what we're seeing here is like, I mean, this is an example of escalatory hacktivism. Cyber Avengers are regarded as a hacktivist group. And they targeted operational technology, and they impacted critical infrastructure and households, and real people went essentially without water for 2 days. So we are seeing these attacks like come closer to home. And what's really interesting as well is that Cyber Avengers were essentially caught using AI to develop this capability. So OpenAI published a report that said they were essentially using ChatGPT to build capability. Now, I don't think it was particularly sophisticated. They were just like finding out default credentials. So we're not seeing like this sophisticated like kind of AI that is actually doing the attacks and automating the attacks right now. But what we are seeing is kind of like this intent to target operational technology is spilling over into AI usage. It may be crude right now, but what we actually might see is future, more complex AI that is being used to actually target operational technology.
Wow, that's super interesting. Look, if we just go back a little to the conversation we were having regarding the sophistication of the attacks needed and the sophistication of the knowledge needed to operate these attacks in an OT environment. With AI, you could get there quicker. You could get there with smaller teams, right? Is that fair?
Absolutely. So what we have at the moment in terms of process comprehension, in terms of the whole like kind of more abstracted level of knowledge required, is in itself a knowledge problem, not a skills problem. Right. So in fact, when we were doing the study about penetration testing in OT environments, one of the findings, both from the practitioners and procurers of OT penetration tests, is it's not a skill problem. It's not like there's no deficiency of hacking skills with OT penetration testing, and obviously that's going to then extend to the actual adversaries doing these live attacks. What it is a knowledge gap. It's essentially like this required engineering knowledge that is essentially still desired and still needs to be built in capability. And the one thing that AI is really good at is building knowledge. Although obviously you have to verify what it's told you, like check for hallucinations, it still does expedite that process of learning about niche contexts and things like that. So if you want to be able to like learn about a new skill, a new domain, like maybe hacking OT, then AI is a great way of working, and it's also well adaptable as well. So it's not just the high level stuff that you could learn in a book. It's also, okay, take that thing that I was talking to you about, and then now I've broken into an environment, and what are these things that I'm seeing? Tell me how those work in that context. So it can be this dynamic way of generating this knowledge for you.
Wow. So while it has been quite a nuanced, very skilled and knowledge experienced attack vector, it's going to get easier, and the prevalence will go up, right? Is that a fair thing to say?
I don't think we're necessarily seeing it right now.
Okay.
Not to any real scary level.
Right.
But I don't think we are far off seeing that begin to creep up, and we're going to start seeing that growth, like this proliferation of knowledge that is facilitated by AI basically means we are probably going to see this happening in the next couple of years.
Complicated world. This is becoming more prevalent. Our CISOs will be quaking in their boots. What can we do to help them?
So I think first what you want to do is kind of like recognize the types of mistakes, and also really consider a realistic threat model. Regardless of who or what organization you work for or what you're doing, the first thing to really recognize is that in terms of frequency and volume of threat, likelihood of threat, ransomware is still the key driver. It's still 86% at least over the past 37 years, and that's mainly since 2020 as well. And the main problem encountered there is dependencies. And IT/OT convergence is a great thing for many, many reasons. You can share telemetry, you can increase efficiency, you can do all sorts of things and increase all sorts of different metrics. But at the same time, it is essentially the leading attack surface for any cyber physical impact in OT. So the first thing you should be really worried about is your IT to protect your OT. And going further than that is reducing your dependencies. So as much as you can, reduce how much your OT is fully dependent on your IT. And that doesn't mean completely separating ties. It can mean building in redundancy. It can mean building in resilience so that if certain things do get impacted in the IT, it doesn't have such a catastrophic consequence into your OT. But going further than that, and especially considering your threat model, it's then who do you work for, and are you actually at threat of an adversary wanting to break into your OT and actually do something there as well? I mean, we haven't even covered the idea that espionage is a thing. We focus, at least in our data set and my research, on cyber physical impact and things, but there will be adversaries that will just break into an environment and just sit there in an OT environment. There have been documented cases of where state adversaries have done pre-positioning, where they get in and just poke around, see what it's like, and maybe prepare for something in the future, or just conduct espionage and maybe extract information. Like if you're an organization with a secret source, like if you're an organization that has maybe a popular beverage and you've got a secret source and you don't want that being stolen for commercial reasons. Or if you're developing certain types of defense assets or anything like that, and you don't want that being stolen, or even just considering process comprehension itself. And what I'm kind of leading to with this espionage and this whole piece is the idea that personally, I believe that confidentiality doesn't have as an important place in OT as it maybe should do. Now, it still shouldn't be more of a big deal than availability, integrity, and safety and those kind of things. But it shouldn't be ignored. And a lot of the time, in a lot of narratives, confidentiality just straight up doesn't matter. Whereas it should, because you can help your secret source not being stolen. That espionage piece can be made more difficult. But also when an adversary wants to build process comprehension, you can essentially deprive them of the knowledge that they have to find to be able to further an attack. But then again, what happens if they want to perform some sort of meaningful and specific cyber physical impact? You have to consider that as well. And at that point, I think the thing to really be concerned with is resilience. We can do a lot of detection, we can do a lot of prevention and that kind of thing, but eventually you have to consider the idea of, well, what happens if all of that fails and the adversary gets to the point where they actually can build up an attack and launch it? When at that point you want to be thinking of, how do we survive it? How do we be resilient? How do we recover quickly? And there are loads of strategies you can take. Traditional engineering strategies, just like having things fail open or closed, whichever is the most appropriate. Or just having redundancy so that if one system fails, then another will take over. Like those are traditional engineering strategies anyway.
So you covered a lot of content there. One thing I wanted to pull out, which is really interesting, is we're talking about the level of knowledge, and it's all about knowledge at the end of the day. The skills are out there. It's the knowledge that really isn't in an OT environment. Data exfil, you talked about IT and OT convergence. Well, actually, access to the design blueprints for your plants become equally important. Can you talk a little bit about that and the importance to manage and secure that content?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, those things are absolutely crucial, both for if you want to maintain kind of like confidentiality of like your actual commercials. So, like if you have things that you don't want public for commercial reasons, and also those things are crucial in building process comprehension. So they need to be kept confidential. They need to be kept away from anywhere adversaries may get to for multiple reasons. I think another thing that we haven't seen so far, or at least I haven't seen particularly frequently, is the idea of these kind of documents being pulled out and exfiltrated for things like cyber extortion, because we see lots of cyber extortion in terms of other data being exfiltrated and then extorted for under the threat of being leaked. But what about commercially sensitive things, or things that would allow other bad guys to understand your process and build that up before even getting access, and then they understand how they would leverage an attack?
Oh, that is deeply scary, but it's really, really insightful from a CISO perspective. So thank you for that. Really, really helpful. Okay, so we've got really a much clearer idea. I've certainly got a much clearer idea of the dangers and the pitfalls of running an OT environment like this. If we were to reach out to our CISOs listening today, what would be your 1, 2, 3 in terms of takeaways that you would offer?
Moving away from kind of like the build a realistic threat model and that kind of thing, and past, what kind of threats may be targeting your organization and why, and assuming a level of maturity, I think the first thing that you should be really focusing on is visibility. And I don't just mean like knowing which MAC addresses exist around your environment, like what kind of vendor that pertains to, and what type of device. I mean, what's it doing? How does it sit in the process? How crucial is it to the process? And really kind of like understanding how it all fits together. And for operators, that might not always be the case that they genuinely know that. They might have to reach out to their systems integrator or maintainer that actually focuses on that kind of thing and work together with them as a partner. I think that also kind of spreads nicely onto a second point of have process-aware security. And what I mean here is if an adversary breaks into your environment, they have to do process comprehension. Okay. You should be doing that as well. Right. You should know if an adversary gets access to specific assets in your environment and that's their foothold, what do they have access to in the network from there? What kind of information can they find? And by doing that, you can also find things that you should focus on from a security perspective. So maybe there's certain documents on certain assets that you want to essentially move elsewhere into a more secure enclave. Or maybe you realize that if they get access to an engineering workstation, it could be off 90% of the time and it only needs to be used at certain times, or at least the project file should be encrypted. Or maybe we could segregate cells a little bit better so that if an adversary gets to this specific point in the network, it isn't a single point of failure. And then finally, I think you need this kind of like collaboration between engineering and cybersecurity, and in a lot more of a deep context than what currently happens. Organizations that use OT already typically have super complex organograms and whose responsibility is what is already really, really complex. And you'll find that people that have maybe less typical responsibility will be outranking CISO in certain decisions when it comes to OT. All sorts of crazy things like that happen. So really being able to fix that from an organizational perspective and understand who is responsible for what, but also start thinking of how IT security and OT security teams work together, because an information security management system focused on 27001 for an IT environment is very different to 62443, for example, in an OT environment. And while there is some overlap of a Venn diagram there, those two teams are focusing on very, very different things. Those two teams really need to know exactly where they essentially are going to interact, probably at the demilitarized zone, and they need to know how they would hand things off, how they would work together, how their response plans would interact, because the response plans are typically going to involve both teams. And finally, those working in the OT security team really need to have this engineering knowledge. They need to really understand the engineering environment. They both need to know the actual knowledge about how the process in general works, whatever process. If you're working for a water treatment organization, your OT security engineers should have a reasonable idea of how water treatment works. And then specific to your organization, they should understand how it works in your context as well.
Got it. So if there's one mindset shift that you want our CISOs to think about, what would that be?
I think the thing that I would focus on is defend the entire process at depth, not just the perimeter as it traditionally has been done.
Ric, thank you. Really insightful. I certainly learned a lot about OT security and what's needed, and also the mindset of the attacker these days. It's changing dramatically. Super insightful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.